Your drafts are coming up. Let's do some ADP battles next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5. As always, make sure to follow and stream us on Spotify. Today is Tuesday, March 29th. I am Frank Sample, joined by Scott White, and all of the average draft position used today comes via Fantasy Pros, which is a collection of the best ADP in the industry. Let's start with Cedric Mullins, who has an ADP of 33.4, going up against Teoscar Hernandez, 34.2. You need an outfielder in the third round, Scott? Who you got?
So I think I'm still leaning Cedric Mullins here. I've kind of soured on him in recent weeks. So somebody pointed out to me he had only 59 RBI last year, which is, he had 30 homers. So fewer than twice as many RBI as homers. And, he only had, I think, 91 runs scored, which, considering the production as leadoff hitter, seems kind of low. Like, the lineup context is just horrible here. That's the big point in Teoscar Hernandez's favor, because it's other end of the spectrum for him in the Blue Jays lineup. I mean, sky's the limit in terms of run and RBI. He could deliver, but he's not going to steal as many bases as Cedric Mullins, not even close. And that is the most in-demand category. So I'm still leaning Mullins here, but it's a pretty close call.
All right, let's move on to a pair of Boston Red Sox, now teammates, Xander Bogaerts with an ADP of 39.2, going up against Trevor Story, who has an ADP of 39.8. Scott, who would you go with, Bogaerts or Story?
So I think I'm ready to elevate Story ahead of Bogaerts. This has been a tough range in the shortstop rankings for me. It's a range I pretty much avoid because I like so much of what follows at the position. But yeah, if Trevor Story couldn't stay at Coors Field, Fenway Park was maybe the best place he could go. It has BABIP boosting abilities in its own right because of its odd configuration. So that should help keep the batting average respectable. Maybe even a plus for Trevor Story still. I think he remains a candidate for 30 homers in that ballpark, and he's going to provide steals in a way Bogaerts won't. Bogaerts is like the safe pick in this range of shortstops, which also includes like Corey Seager and Francisco Lindor, Tim Anderson. Bogaerts stands out as the safest of that group, but he might also be the lowest ceiling of that group.
All right, let's take a look at some starting pitchers here, Scott. Julio Urias with an ADP of 27 versus Zack Wheeler with an ADP of 28.2. Urias last year, the lone 20-game winner in baseball. The underlying numbers don't like him as much. Zack Wheeler, dealing with the shoulder injury, was absolutely fantastic, Scott. Where do you go here, Urias versus Wheeler?
Zack Wheeler. I haven't been scared off by this shoulder issue, which, by the way, his shoulder hasn't actually hurt since December because he had to shut down in December. It put him behind pace here for March, but he's not dealing with shoulder pain right now, and he's building up, and there have been no issues there. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. And before word of the shoulder came down, everybody was drafting him at least a round ahead of Julio Arias. So I don't see much reason to change that. Obviously, I mean, he showed, at least last year, Wheeler showed more strikeout potential than Arias ever does. And even if the shoulder limits his workload early in the season, I can't see who limits Wheeler's workload, I should say. I can't see Julio Arias approaching the 215 innings that like Wheeler did last year. So I still think Wheeler has more upside in terms of volume as well.
Let's take a look at another pair of pitchers here, Scott. Carlos Rodon, who was a top 12 starting pitcher in both roto and fantasy points per game last season. He has an ADP of 90.8, and he's going up against Alek Manoah, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball last year, and he showed up. He was really good last season. His ADP is 91.6. Who do you have here, Scott? Rodon versus Manoah?
So Rodon last year had a 2.37 ERA, a 0.96 whip, and 12.6 K per nine. Compare that to Corbin Burns, a 2.43 ERA, 0.94 whip, 12.6 K per nine. Virtually identical. I mean, leaving DeGrom out of it because he wasn't around for half the season, there was no pitcher on an inning per inning basis that really compared to Corbin Burns, except for Carlos Rodon. So if you're telling me the velocity's back, that he's over that dip we saw last September and the concerns that went along with that, and apparently it is because he's throwing 98 this spring, then I think Carlos Rodon needs to be treated more like an ace in fantasy, and I would definitely put him ahead of Alek Manoah, who has a skill set I like, but he has more to prove.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, your smart speakers, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. We'll be back again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.